Hey y'all, so this is a perfect example of why um, these problems happen in both parties. They happen in both parties, you guys. So every time that y'all organize with Carlos Marroquin, Michelle Manos, Betty Dumas, the Feel the Burn Dem clubs, and they bring in Jimmy Dore, Jackson Hinkle, Pasta Jardula, Fiorella Isabel, or even at this point, if they were to bring in Cenk Uygur and Anna Kasparian. And quite frankly, I'm even on the fence with the majority report because of how stupid they are on local politics. But I'm not going to put them on the level with what these other people have done in accepting bigots, Nazis, neo Nazis, and transphobes, homophobes, sexists, misogynists into their midst. But the reason I included the majority report is because they've been very reluctant to denounce their friends. And my understanding is Sam Cedar put out some sort of statement this week. I have not seen it. So I can't speak to that. But the GOP has the same problem because they are also trying to pull themselves away from the neo Nazis that are circling their party, including people like Nick Fuentes, right? So, Mike Figueroa, I'm sorry if I'm butchering your last name, dude, um, covers this story.
Well, my friends, we've got another instance where Republicans may be made a little bit of an oopsie. And it's just so crazy to me how this just keeps happening again and again. If you'll recall, a couple of weeks ago, the Hamilton County chapter of Moms for Liberty, I guess, accidentally happened to feature a Hitler quote on the front page of their newspaper. And now, just, weeks later, we have multiple Arizona Republican Party officials having to come out and publicly distance themselves from an event where neo-Nazi Nick Fuentes.
And let me point out that the reason Nick Fuentes became such a public name is because he started working with Kanye West and Milo Yiannopoulos. That's how you say his name. So the reality is that, like I said, we have this on both sides of the fence, and y'all need to cut this crap out because nobody wants this shit. Like, we want normal politics, and nobody's going to be like, I don't know, you might have a better strategy for the country or whatever if you're constantly colluding with fucking neo-Nazis and dumbass people who are propagating hateful rhetoric.
Was the keynote speaker. So here's the flyer for the event in question, scheduled to take place on July 30th. And as you can see, it's an event organized by the Arizona College Republicans United Group, and it prominently features Nick Fuentes as the guest speaker, along with Jake Chansley, also known as the QAnon Shaman. But on top of that, there's also Ryan Sanchez, aka...
So you got the guy that stormed the Capitol with the horns on his head? Thought that he was doing the right thing by standing on the desk and desecrating our congressional chambers. Nice work.
A culture war criminal who was formerly a member of a neo-Nazi fight club, which is a thing called Rise Above movement. But I mean, the inclusions...
Which, by the way, some of the speakers that Betty organized for that March for Medicare for All event in LA were people who showed up to the insurrection, recorded it, and spoke highly of it.
aside from the extremists and the Nazis, that should really stand out to you the most are the official Republican Party organizations that are supposedly affiliated. That includes the Pima County GOP, as well as the Maricopa and Yavapai County GOPs, who are supposedly in support of this event. Yeah, so you have official Republican Party organizations supposedly affiliated with this event, where a neo-Nazi Holocaust denier is the keynote speaker. That is not a good look. And that's quite the understatement, right? But once the flyer was released and started to circulate on social media, Republican officials from all three of the organizations.
By the way, for those of you who don't follow all of these live stream people, and maybe you only get a little bit of like what's going on in this subculture from me, Anna Kasparian has apparently started defending Kyle Rittenhouse. Yeah, so there's that.
Supposedly affiliated quickly condemned it. For example, the Maricopa County Republican Committee tweeted, "The MCRC never authorized, sponsored, or promoted the upcoming July 30th College Republicans United Convention. Any placement of MCRC or Maricopa GOP, etc. on anything associated with the CRU event is unauthorized." Now, additionally, Pima County Republican Chairman Dave Smith put out a similar statement saying that they also never authorized the event or agreed to speak at or support this event, and the Yavapai County Republicans basically echoed the same exact sentiment. Now, the question is, how did this happen? Did the Arizona College Republicans United group just lie, or did people within these organizations give them the green light? Well, the accusations are certainly flying, and the paranoia has been ramped up because...
Well, Mike, they independently operate. So caucuses, clubs, county parties, they independently operate. That doesn't mean that they can't be censured and dischartered. These things can happen if they make bad decisions, but they are independent organizations, and I think that largely has to do with how they set up their PAC money to fund themselves.
We're all kind of pointing the fingers at each other, and this has kind of devolved into a hilariously entertaining kerfuffle online. For example, Representative Alexander Kolodin responded to the flyer claiming, "The GOP committees I have spoken to were surprised to hear it. Whoever is doing this should be treated as a saboteur." And in response to Kolodin, Luke Mossyman, who is the chair of the Maricopa County Young Republicans Club, says that an insider told him that it was Brian Ferentz, who is the Maricopa County member at large, who's the person that okayed the inclusion, at least for the...
Neither of these parties have done enough to actually put into their bylaws that they will handle extremism. Neither of them have done enough to actually censure, remove, and discharter. Period.
Maricopa County GOP on the flyer. However, Ferris chimed in denying that, saying, "I'm not authorized to make decisions for the entire MCRC. Right. Just curious who this supposed insider is, or is it like anonymous quote-unquote experts?" Now, I find this absolutely hilarious because you have a bunch of hyper-partisan, conspiratorial Republicans all scrambling to place blame on someone other than themselves, and they're all pointing the fingers at each other, and they're getting increasingly conspiratorial, talking about saboteurs and insiders, and even though we're dealing with deeply unserious imbeciles, I do have to give them credit for at least being very entertaining. But we're just getting started, because college...
Honestly, that's surprising to me that the GOP would take that type of marketing language on this rather than say, we're working on identifying who is responsible for this so that we can censure and remove them and discharter whatever organization might have been affiliated with the county or the state party from participating within our political party anymore. Because, like, that's your natural progression of how you would handle it.
Republicans United decided to bust out the receipts, and in response to the Pima County Republicans saying that they never agreed to speak, college Republicans responded to that tweet saying, GOP has an integrity problem, along with a screenshot of an email between them and the Pima County Republican Party's vice chairman, where she says, yes, absolutely, when they asked her to verify that her or someone else was able to speak at the event, and this verification email was a follow-up to them getting the go-ahead in person.
Yeah, but did she know who the keynote speaker was at the time that she made that agreement? She probably thought this was like a normal sort of caucus event and didn't realize who they booked.
So let's pause for a moment, because based on that receipt, it seems as if the Pima County GOP was caught. Dead to rights. They're lying, right? They confirmed that they would be speaking at the event. This is their second vice chair. However, even though that is true and that email is real, well, they responded, and the response is actually fairly reasonable, at least by Republican standards, right? They're claiming that they were misled by the CRU, and when you hear their side of the story, it's not unreasonable to deduce that, yeah, it seems like CRU didn't really give them the full picture when they talked about this event. Here's the details. The Arizona Mirror reports, quote, this was a setup, Pima County GOP Chairman Dave Smith told the Mirror. Smith said that ASU CRU's founder, Rick Thomas, approached Anastasia Tatakis, the party's second vice chairman, at an event and asked if the county party would speak at a college Republicans event. They agreed, and ASU CRU later followed up with an email sending a flyer that did not list Fuentes or Pima GOP as a sponsor. Quote, we just thought she was going to be a speaker at a Republican conference, Smith said. We were misrepresented to and lied to. Smith said that the ordeal has caught him off guard and created new ways that the county committees will be communicating in the future. That sentiment was echoed by Tatakis, who was listed as a speaker at the event representing the Pima County GOP. This particular activity and behavior where you are sabotaged and set up is completely indescribable to me, Tatakis said. We do not participate in any anti-Semitic anything. This is horrible, and had we known, we would have never committed. So when you hear their side of the story, I don't necessarily think that it is wrong for them to feel like they were being misled, although before we got their side of the story, I told you that their response was reasonable by Republican standards, and that's because I don't think that they're without fault completely. You know, it's clear that they didn't do their due diligence. Now, they did respond to the CRU and their receipts with their own receipt, and they shared the flyer that was given to them in a Twitter reply saying, actually, you have an integrity problem. This is the attachment that you sent to our second vice chair. She agreed to speak at a GOP event. You sent her a different flyer, not the one you're now promoting. No one agreed to appear with your anti-Semitic white supremacist extremist. Now, if you look at the flyer here closely, there's one very big red flag to me that leads me to conclude that they just didn't do their due diligence here. So even though the quality is terrible, you can still make out the text that says more pending, quote, other speakers redacted due to security. And me personally, if I saw that on a flyer that they sent me as part of an event that I was going to be a part of, I'd be at least a little bit curious. Right? I'd want to inquire more about that, at least for my own personal safety reasons, because if this person is a security threat or there's threats to them, well, I think that it's important to know how that's going to affect.
Well, Mike, I mean, you do have to understand that, like, a lot of these people are old as fuck at this point, and these parties have operated in a much different way until recent years, the recent decade, right? So it's becoming more and more extreme. So they are in this mindset that, oh, this is normal operations. Like, we're just doing Republican Party stuff, right? They should have, you're right, they should have been somewhat wise to the fact that that many Republicans have been indoctrinated into a very alt-right way of thinking, and so therefore they should have been asking more questions. But some of these old motherfuckers get really lazy about asking questions because they think it's business as usual.
Affect myself or the other speakers potentially. So the fact that they weren't curious enough to ask, That is a failure on their part. And it's also a failure on their part because they're working with this group for this event that in the past has had ties to Nick Fuentes' white nationalist movement. And these ties have been known and open for years. But I mean, maybe those Republicans within these organizations just didn't know that. But I mean, you probably should have known that, right? If you are part of the official GOP in your county, then I think that it is incumbent on you to know who you're coordinating with, who you are organizing with. Either way, it does seem like the college Republicans were being overly coy because they knew that the presence of an out and proud neo-Nazi might be a little bit too controversial, to put it mildly. But
I'd like to see the progressive live streamers coming out a bit stronger about this on the functions that are getting put together by the Movement for the People's Party in coordination with Feel the Burn Dem Club organizers, because we have the same problem. And we also have the same problem with the Democratic Party just disavowing and saying, I have nothing to do with this. Not my problem. I know that there are actual party delegates involved with coordinating with third parties to put together events in which there are racist, bigoted, transphobic, homophobic people trying to speak towards issues that matter to us, like Medicare for all, right? But then taking their floor space to speak about Julian Assange, right? We have the same problem. There are a lot of organizations that are just causing chaos and making it difficult for us to actually get the programs that we're looking for, because they are constantly attacking specific marginalized groups like the transgender community, non-binary, and because they're constantly coordinating with these people who are willing to attack these communities, it's very difficult for us to move forward because we look like hypocrites, right?
they got into more of a back and forth on Twitter, and this exchange, as you can see, is deeply unhinged. So CRU responded to that tweet from Pima Republicans saying, "The flyer changed multiple times since mid-June. Speakers have been added and taken off the list several times because of hard feelings about one or more speakers before Fuentes was even thought of. Guilt by association has been a leftist mindset the GOP has now adopted." Yes, because not wanting to be associated with Nazis is a very lefty mindset. Pima responded saying, "Values and principles matter. If you can't denounce an anti-Semitic racist, you might belong in the Democratic Party," which is just, again, fucking wild. Now CRU responded to that saying, "But doing things with the log cabin Republicans and other homosexuals, that's okay for Pima GOP. Your big tent is degenerate." That exchange to me is hysterical because on one hand you have the CRU saying, "Oh, you're doing this guilt by association game that the leftists are doing," but then they're like, "This shoe with the log cabin Republicans," which is guilt by association. It's hilarious. Like, all of these people are so unserious that I can't look at this and not find it just incredibly entertaining. Like, to see them bicker back and forth, I say let them fight. Now, whether or not these Republicans, the official Republicans, not the Nazis, although, maybe that's a distinction without a difference depending on who you're talking about, but the official party organizations, whether or not they were misled or this was simply a miscommunication, that's up to interpretation. But the problem is these Republicans didn't denounce Nick Fuentes because they felt compelled to take a principled stand against neo-Nazis and anti-Semitism, as they said. Let's be clear, they did it because that's what was politically expedient. Because in an op-ed for AZ Central, E.G. Montini explains, while Arizona Republicans proclaim how grievously offended they are to have been linked in any fashion to Nick Fuentes, a number of their most high-profile members are linked to him proudly. Republican State Senator Wendy Rogers, for example, was a proud speaker at Fuentes' America First Political Action Conference in Florida last year, where she called the white nationalists in attendance patriots and promoted hanging enemies. parties. Then there's Republican U.S. Representative Paul Gosar, who has also attended a Fuentes event and defended Fuentes on the right-wing social networking site Gab, saying the phony January 6th committee's partisan witch hunt continues as they have now set their sights on young conservative Christians like Nick Fuentes. This is pure political persecution, and it has to stop. You might remember as well that Gosar and fellow Republican Representative Andy Biggs were among 26 members of the House Oversight and Accountability Committee who refused to sign a pledge denouncing white nationalism and white supremacy, as well as the kooky but widespread Great Replacement theory that says non-white individuals are being brought into the United States to replace white voters. And there's the state Republican Party's most high-profile member, losing governor candidate Carrie Lake. She not only endorsed Gosar, but said of him, Congressman Gosar is the GOAT. We need strong America First patriots like Gosar at every level of government. Yeah, and therein lies the problem, right? Publicly distancing yourself from a high-profile neo-Nazi, that's one thing. But tolerating the anti-Semitism that is rampant within your sphere of politics, in your Republican Party institutions, that just makes you complicit if you don't also combat that. And let's be clear, if Nick Fuentes weren't such a high-profile neo-Nazi, odds are these Republican organizations would have no problem with him speaking alongside them. Because it's not the views that he espouses that make them uncomfortable. It's the political fallout that they're really scared of, right? It's the backlash to being associated with him that frightens them, not his views. And if they really were ignorant about him and this organization's affiliation with Fuentes' Groyper movement, then don't you think that this whole kerfuffle would be a wake-up call? And I say this because, as Stop Anti-Semitism reports, this entire event ended up getting shut down by the venue itself due to Nick Fuentes' inclusion. And if you look at the replies, which you never should, I mean, you can see that it is just deeply, deeply anti-Semitic, and all of these anti-Semites are being floated to the top since they pay for Twitter Blue. Shouldn't all of this, shouldn't the constant oopsies that they keep having make them a little bit uncomfortable, lead to them realizing, it's weird how...
And also, for those of you who speak at events like where there have been, other speakers booked like this that are objectionable. Like, for instance, that LA event for March for Medicare for All included Jackson Hinkle, who's moving to Florida now to hook up with some Russian chick. Apparently he's got an RT deal. Y'all invited Fiorella and Pasta, who Fiorella definitely has an RT deal. I don't know about Pasta, but Pasta ended up not showing up because he refused to get vaccinated and refused to get wear a mask, right? And this was about a year ago after we or maybe it was 2 years ago. I don't know, but it was like at a time when we still were supposed to be masked or at least vaccinated, right? You've got Jimmy Dore, who has been pushing forward the Red Brown Alliance, invited was he like a Proud Boy or something to become a regular guest on his show. And while I warned my local activists about what this was, that it was being sponsored by the people, the Movement for the People's Party, which is totally a fundraising grift, which is why Dr. Cornel West ended up running green instead. Like, he announced under the People's Party, and then 9 days later, after being contacted by several people about the fact that the People's Party is so bad. Like, they've had racism problems, they've had ableism problems, they don't elect their leadership. It's just Nick Brana, right, and his dad. And according to the people who actually were part of the organization, who petitioned them to change their ways, right? They turned over their own board members several times, every time they challenged their opinions. And yet, my county chair spoke at that event in Orange County, even though it was organized by a third party, and she's the Democratic county chair. And she did so at the encouragement of a Central Committee member, Dr. Bill, who is also a national representative for the Progressive Democrats of America. I gave them heads ups that this was a bad idea, and they did it anyway. So this is why when people across America are like, oh my God, the Democrats aren't doing anything for us. This is why. Because you are not unified behind a specific platform and trying to accomplish it. You're doing all kinds of bullshit to fuck us over. And that's what's happening with the GOP as well. So it's a complete toss-up at this point with how fucked up are either side.
Oh, so many neo-Nazis are prominent within the same political circles that I run in. I mean, think about it from your perspective. If you're a DSA member, right, and your local chapter frequently hosted events with neo-Nazi speakers, and it kept happening again and again and again. I mean, wouldn't that at least give the ordinary person pause and get them to reevaluate their association with that particular organization? I mean, if I was part of an organization and they kept getting linked to neo-Nazis, either wittingly or unwittingly, that would horrify me. It'd get me to not just reevaluate the people who I associate with, it'd get me to rethink my values. Because if all these people who share my values and political goals keep getting radicalized into Nazism, then maybe that tells me I'm on the wrong path. And the fact that these Republicans aren't being introspective presumably tells me that they're either dumb or complicit. Because regardless, if your political movement is wittingly or unwittingly enabling Nazis, at the end of the day, you're still enabling Nazis, so it's a distinction without a difference.